Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Management Training and Staff Qualifications. Please make sure to look out for an email after the webinar containing the slides as well as information to register for our next webinar. Presenters today will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. You can ask these questions throughout the webinar. The Questions tab on your sidebar on GoToWebinar. The questions we do not get to, Connects will provide those to the speaker, and we will be distributing the entire list after the webinar to all attendees. Lastly, you will see a number of materials in your handout section on the right side. These handouts include information on our partner today, as well as upcoming Connects conference agendas and the slides for the presentation. If you have any technical issues, please send a text in the question or chat tab to GoToWebinar platform or call GoToWebinar directly at 888-646-0014. My name is John Tochi, and I manage partnerships for Connects. Connects is a leading educational partner showcasing innovative processes and technology for the GMP validation environments. I'm happy to be here with you this webinar in CAI's Ops Readiness series. You'll see our 2022 calendar. All of our conferences listed in red will be hybrid, which means attendees will have the option to attend either virtually or in person. Please email info@connects.org if you're interested in multiple conferences, and we can work on a special discount. If you have colleagues interested as well, we have special group discounts. We have our upcoming conference in December, CSV, Essay, and Data Integrity, which I'll talk about next, as well as our February 2022 conference in Philadelphia and virtually, Room Qualification. You'll see our next conference, as I mentioned, CSV and Essay and Data Integrity Compliance Congress. This will be taking place from December 6th through the 8th, virtually and in San Diego. We'll be covering 40+ sessions on compliant processes, computer software assurance, and data integrity governance. All attendees will also have access to the virtual platform, which provides you with all recorded sessions on demand for up to 30 days after the conference. I would like to take a minute to provide a little bit of background on our partner of today's, CAI. CAI originated almost 25 years ago in 1996 with only 2 employees. Fast forward to today, now CAI is an employee-owned company with more than 500 employees at locations all over the world. CAI strives to be a trusted partner to their clients through their offerings in a number of different areas, which include commissioning and qualification, building commissioning, process and manufacturing technologies, quality compliance and regulatory, automation and information technology, human performance, asset management, reliability, program and project management. If you'd like to learn more about CAI or inquire about their services, you can visit their website at www.cagents.com. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers, Jeff Hall and Alice Redmond. Jeff Hall is an Associate Director in Human Performance Services with over 30 years of experience with implementing programs to support the startup, operation, and maintenance of process systems and equipment. He has over 20 years of experience managing projects of up to 125 million and leading groups of people ranging from 1 to over 25 persons. Jeff has an MBA and is an expert in training development and project management. Uses the skills in these 2 areas to manage project costs and efficiency. He has used this approach to create focused, effective, and efficient organizations and successful project implementation. He's experienced in auditing, developing programs, and leading projects in GMP, GLP, and GCP environments. Our next speaker, Alice Redmond, has a PhD and is the Chief Strategy Officer at CAI. Has more than 29 years of experience in lifecycle management of pharma facilities, inclusive of regulatory compliance, facility and process design, technology transfer, commissioning, qualification, and validation. Previously, Ms. Redmond worked for Sandoz, Novartis, and Basil Condal, Ireland, in the areas of quality, validation, and technical operations. Following Novartis, Alice led the Global Regulatory Commission and Qualification Group for a global engineering company for 13 years. Alice has large global project experience of greenfield facilities, including fill finish, biotech, gene therapy, medical devices, small and large molecule API, OSD from design through to operational readiness. She's a former winner of the ISBE Robert F. Sherwood Article of the Year Award, and she was a committee member on the Biotech and Disposable COPs and lead on the Knowledge Assets Committee. Alice currently serves in the ISBE CNQ COP Steering Committee as a former co-chair of this committee and the RQHC RSC committees. Is on the ISBE Commissioning and Qualification Baseline Guide Revision Team. Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and Alice, and we will get the presentation started.
Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well today. Give me a second while I get my screen up here.
Okay, we're good.
I'm Jeff Hall. I've been with CAI for a little over 5 years. I've worked in the industry, as John said a moment ago, for probably well over 20 years, probably more likely going on 30. Today, we're going to talk about management training and staff qualifications as it relates to operational readiness. Obviously, in the time frame we have, we probably can't dive into a whole lot the detail required for each part of this, but we wanted to give you something to think about when you're actually working through the startup phase of a new project or a process improvement. So as you can see, So typically when we start these off, this series has been basically focused on operational readiness. And so what we're talking about is that time period that actually starts before you get into run mode. What do you need to do to be able to complete the activities, do everything that's necessary to get you through design, project mode, and get you to the point where you can actually reach run mode? What are those things that you need to think about? The three components that we really look at are the people, the procedures, and then the actual physical plan. You need all three of those to successfully actually manufacture a project. And within those, you need to be able to manage the site production variables, and you need to have quality controls in place. So without any one of these, you can't get to a successful startup. Our focus is going to be on the people component. Why? Because as we've said in the other presentations, that is your largest variable. You can put procedures in place, they're fairly fixed. You can put equipment in place, but it's the people that you have to manage that on a day-to-day basis can change the way they do things or the way they look at things. This is the model that we look at when we're talking about doing a vertical startup. We hope to achieve a vertical startup so that we can get to our design output and our design model for manufacturing in the shortest time possible. So in order to do that, you have to go through all these components during the startup that need to be prepared to get you to that point where you can actually shift over to the operational mode. Alice will talk about a little bit more of that in a moment, and we'll talk a little bit more about how the people part applies to this particular model. If you are efficient and you hit all the gates perfectly during the startup mode, then you'll be operational ready in a very short period of time in an efficient way, and things will go a lot smoother. If not, then you end up with this kind of stair-step approach to operational readiness as you manage risk and take opportunities to pick up those areas that you may have missed during the design phase. So today we're going to talk about the importance of proper training of management, and not just management, but the qualification of plant operators, technicians, and their supervision. Talk about a few things that you should consider, especially during the design phase. And then in each of those categories, what does training and qualification look like? What types of things should you be considering? Again, these are the different components when we start talking about doing a startup. We're going to focus on the operational readiness part and how people can affect that. All right. So having said that, I'm going to turn this over to Alice so she can talk through a few slides with you. Alice, I'll change the slides as you ask me to change them.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So you can transition this slide to completeness, Jeff, just in deference to time. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is I suppose, the path to operational readiness, particularly with how do you plan and design for operational readiness. So this is something that's super important. So ultimately, the pinnacle that we want to get to is operational excellence. And we can only do this by controlling the risks within each of the work streams of readiness. So without speaking through each of these, you can read the steps of the stairs. We need to look at it from the organizational level, and we need to look at it I suppose, the shift to the work streams to ensure that each one is ready. But what's often forgotten about is at the design phase of a project or the design phase of a facility is how do you design in for operational readiness at that point in time in the context of people, procedures, and physical plant. So to achieve and be I suppose, most efficient in terms of when we get to the talent plan here, we have to have an input very, very, very early on. So Jeff, if you go to the next slide, please. So how do you integrate this from the start, operational readiness from the start of a project? And is it always a priority of the design team? I've been in the industry for 30 years now. I think since my bio was written, I've had it on a year or so. And in terms of, from a design perspective, usually the first thing that a company wants to achieve is they want to achieve the, get the capital acquisition request approved. So the capital is approved for the project. Then it's assembly of the team, get the design team in place, and get the long lead equipment items in place, because this could be anything from 18 months to up to 18 months. So at the very beginning, at project initiation, there's usually a scramble to get the front end study done and the design done. And it's all really about, the planning permission for the facility, the permits. It's about the equipment. Not very many projects I've been involved with over the years think about the people part of it back here. And this can be quite, this can be quite troublesome, because as you go through the life cycle of the project, when you're going through the design, build, and test, there are very, very many opportunities for knowledge exchange. There's many opportunities also to input into the business and the process requirements to understand and make sure that the facility is going to be ready, operationally ready, and actually also fit for readiness, rather than a facility that is designed without, I suppose, operational hands and input. So here, getting the requirements correct from an operational perspective is really important. So we need stakeholders from the operational side, from each of the functions, inputting here. At the design and build phase, again, we need to ensure these requirements are built in. But actually, again, it's the right set of eyes and the right people seeing this. But in fact, our talent plan needs to start back here, because if we've got a facility that is a new technology, a facility very close to me here in Dublin is traditionally an API facility and started into a cell and gene therapy facility a number of years ago, which is now regulatory approved. So this is a very different technology for them. So at the phase of project initiation, they knew they needed to get a talent plan in place and move this forward through the life cycle. So I suppose the key message from this slide is we want to talk about operational readiness starts at the very beginning. It can start with an outline of this is the resources we feel that are needed to support the project. And then we ensure that we build the talent plan in terms of recruitment, training, and qualification throughout the life cycle, taking the best advantage we can in terms of the design, build, and test, so that when you come to the implementation phase, you are aiming for operationally ready in an expeditious way in terms of no delays because you're waiting for people to be recruited, qualified, or otherwise. Next slide, please, Jeff. So in the context of what needs to be assessed and why, there's very, very many things, okay? And ideally, we want all of these items to fit together in a jigsaw or a Rubik's Cube, as I put it, in a way that we can integrate them and integrate them seamlessly. Unfortunately, this is not always what happens. And I think some of the practices we're talking about today is our aim to think about this earlier and get this in place, particularly in the context of employee selection and then the associated training. So we need to look at, I suppose, a tailored analysis and appropriate needs to the level of technology and operational strategy. So particularly if this is a new technology, the requirements and what you need to build in from a talent plan is very much more important to do this and get insight into this. And this could be engaging with the vendors, engaging with local universities in terms of how do you do this, and then taking advantage of the time with vendors, the time with the design team, the time with the C&Q team to learn the equipment and to get over the hurdles of familiarity and knowledge exchange, which often happen. At this point now, I'm going to pass back to Jeff and he'll step through the process with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. So as Alice said, there's a lot of work that you should consider up front before you actually even get to the point where you're leaving the design phase. It's often left out. So when do we start thinking about training our team? What do we start looking at? You know, as we said before, there's 3 P's to this. There's production equipment, there's people and procedures. All of those have to be considered. But at what point do you want to start talking about the people? Too often, I've seen where that doesn't actually happen sometimes until you actually enter the operational mode, to where you start looking at things and saying, oh, we don't really know how to do this, and we thought we knew how to do it, but we hadn't really thought that through. So at what point do you need to do that? Well, considering that your people are the largest variable in your process, that is the component you really is important to look at up front. So where do we start? Well, the typical start is always based on resumes. You design your organization, you build out your organization, you put a talent plan, which we talked about, in place, a hiring plan in place. All of that comes back to looking at resumes. And resumes are great for giving you the experience that people have been through, give you some of the document training that they've received, certifications, the education that they've received to make sure they meet all the minimum requirements. The biggest challenge with that is the resume tells you, it gives you a look back. It doesn't give you a look forward. It doesn't give you a look at how you're going to do it with your company, how you're going to do it with your new processes. So you have to take into consideration what the skills and knowledge are going to be required for the individuals who are managing and operating your company. Resumes only give you a snapshot in the past. With new people, you have to look forward. You have to consider everything that you're about to put into place and try to do that as much as you can up front. Too often I've seen people hired just for the resume, and then people are shocked by what they see after the person has started work and finding out that they've been doing this thing for 30 years. They've been doing it this one way for 30 years, but it's not the way that you're going to do it in your process as you go forward. So the resume is only the beginning. It is part of the process, but it's only the beginning. If that's all that you consider when you look at the training and qualifications of your management and your staff, you're going to end up on this curve that looks something like the non-operational ready curve. You're going to enter into operations and you're going to have pauses along the way where you have to catch your people up to the way that you guys have designed the business, the way the business is designed to operate. So what we're going to try to do today is give you a little bit of insight as to things you should consider. Again, there's much more that can be looked at, but these are some of the most important things that we've seen through our experience over the years that should be considered when you're looking at senior management, when you're looking at frontline supervisors, and when you're looking at your operators and your technicians. So senior management, what does that look like? What is the difference between senior management and middle management? Well, a lot of the things they do are the same. Their goals and objectives are typically quite different. Senior management is more focused on the company goals, the financials, the shareholders. That's where their focus is. Middle management is focused on helping get to those goals, helping deliver those goals on a day-to-day basis. Are we hitting our mark? Are we hitting our marks on sales? Are we hitting our marks on production quota? Are we getting quality product out the door? Are our patients getting their product and medicines that they need in time? So some of the skills required for both of those are the same, but their jobs are uniquely different. When it comes to education, senior management and middle management usually require at least a 4-year degree. Obviously, senior management in most cases will have master's degrees, MBAs. They will have multiple degrees in different disciplines in different areas, and lots of experience throughout time. So things to consider, and basically we put these into the two what I would call two major buckets for each of the roles we're going to talk about. There's the soft skill component and the technical skill. In the soft skills world, communication has to be number one. If you can't talk up and down your organization, if you can't talk to your shareholders, if you can't effectively get across the message that you're trying to deliver, then communication will fail and the rest of these processes most likely will break down. As a senior manager and a middle manager, negotiation principles are important. Understanding how to negotiate in different ways, negotiate contracts, negotiate with people, negotiate across organizations. Even as we sit here today, negotiations say with Kinex. Those are things that we need to know how to do. And then business problem solving. Very seldom in this world does everything ever go perfect. As a matter of fact, most often it does not. We run into speed bumps along the way, and we have to understand, we don't always understand how to deal with them when they occur, so we need to understand how the methods we go about solving those problems to be able to get through those hurdles. And then leadership. What are good leadership skills? What components in leadership make up a great organization? Which feeds you into the organizational skills part. How do you build the organizations? How do you make sure you have the right people in the right places? And how do you work with those people? Now, technical skills, I don't want to overstate the first one, but I'm amazed today, even as I talk to senior people in other companies that we work with, that the computer skills are still seem to be something that are assumed in today's world. Now, we have kids that are great at video games, but you couldn't ask them how to operate a Microsoft product per se. So you got to make sure that all the way through the organization that people have those computer skills that are necessary to do their job. Office management. That includes how to manage office space, how to manage the people in the space. Technical writing, information technology. There are so many different forms of informational technology today that we have to work with within our companies that you should consider the ones that your company is going to be using as you build out the company and you put these systems in place for people to use. Project management, that's a pretty standard skill, but still there's a lot to project management. Data, and I'll say data and financial analytics. You have to understand what you're looking at and you know, are you on path, are you on track to make money with your organization, and considering the profits and the revenues, which feeds you into accounting and finances. Now, like I said at the beginning, these are not all encompassing. These are just some of the key ones that we've seen over time that are important to consider when you're bringing on senior managers and you're talking about hiring middle management. Their core skills are similar to both, realizing that also senior management has a little bit of a different role in that they have a higher level of responsibility to potentially shareholders and the financial goals for the company. So frontline supervisors. Start this one out a little bit slower because this is often a role that is overlooked. And it's overlooked for many reasons. It's overlooked because of where these people come from. What's expected of the frontline supervisors is often, you know, really understated. So what is a frontline supervisor? They are the people responsible for directly supervising the operations that take place on the manufacturing or production floor or in the labs or in the maintenance and facilities area. They are the people who are directly responsible for those. They have the operators and technicians report directly to them. So they're responsible for all the activities. Where we often fall down and forget about the frontline supervisors is where do we mostly get them from? Most of our frontline supervisors are promoted from within. And I'm sure most of you have seen this where you've had this amazing tech. He's your lead tech. He knows everything in the plant. He knows how to do everything. So we think we should promote that person to a supervisor role because they would be the best person with the most knowledge in that role. Well, they would be if all that role included was the technical side of the role. They have great technical skills, but they haven't had the adequate training or experience to deal with the soft skill side of that role. And again, this is often overlooked. And I've worked with several companies that have over time and probably far too down the road built into their programs, their training programs, their qualification programs, a specific curriculum for frontline supervisors. They typically come to you with a high school diploma. One thing that people, when they're coaching and mentoring and talking about professional development with frontline supervisors is they have to consider letting them know that if all they ever do is get a high school diploma or even just a 2-year degree, that can be very career limiting for them in some industries. I've seen some great people, intelligent people, really smart people, common sense people in supervisor roles in the pharma and biotech industry, that this is as far as they've gotten as frontline supervisor because nobody ever gave them career advice on moving to the next level in their education. Nobody ever told them that if you really want to move up in the company to a management role, you have to have a 4-year degree. And people say, well, you don't necessarily have to have that. I can tell you many people have been held back because they don't, just for that reason. So consider that when you're looking at your frontline supervisors, the training that they need to have, and giving them career advice. Don't forget to let them know that along the way to get to the next level, these are the steps you have to take. And one of those is improving your education. All right, this is a wordy slide. I'm not going to read all these bullets to you. The big thing to take away from this slide is these are just a small list of the responsibilities that a frontline supervisor typically has. They have to communicate with people. They have to work with teamwork. They have to follow procedures and make sure people are following procedures. A good frontline supervisor spends time on the floor with his people or her people and in the office doing the administrative side of the business as well. So they have a huge role. They have to communicate up and down the chain in the organization. They have to communicate to middle and senior management. They have to communicate to their teams. They sometimes have to communicate across their teams to other organizations where they have to work together. And sometimes they have to communicate outside the organization. So the frontline supervisor has a tremendous role in the company and a tremendous amount of responsibilities. And on some days that can be very overwhelming for a person in this position. So how do you help them? So things to consider, particularly as you're hiring new people, getting into the startup, you might bring people in with this experience, but like I said, they haven't done it your way. So consider, again, number one, communication. They have to know how to communicate up and down the organization. They have to have good teamwork skills. They have to be able to talk to their operators and technicians and get them to work as a team. And when there is conflict, how do they deal with conflict resolution? How do they build relationships, particularly when you're talking about working across departments? Coaching and mentoring. How do you hold people accountable? Something in recent years that when I first entered the industry wasn't even part of the conversation was emotional intelligence. How do you deal with a person's personality? How do you deal with the emotions that people come to work with every day? And then negotiation skills. This is a little different than negotiating a contract or negotiating with shareholders. This is negotiating across organizations from an interdepartment standpoint. And not only do they have all this, they have to understand the technical side. They need to understand, they need to know what they have to be from a operating processes standpoint. They're the subject matter expert, at least that's how a lot of people look at them. They have to have the proper computer skills. I've worked in organizations, even in recent years where a supervisor didn't understand how to navigate an Excel spreadsheet. So those are all things to consider when you're hiring this person and after you've hired this person. If they don't have those skills, or you promote this person, they don't have those skills, they need to have those skills to do their job. What is required? These are at a minimum: project management and then problem solving. I can say problem solving and troubleshooting because they have a huge technical component that they own, particularly when they're looking at operating the processes and maintaining equipment. The role of a frontline supervisor can be very difficult. They have a lot of responsibility and they're held accountable. And at the end of the day, they are key to manufacturing product, quality product, and helping the company to reach its major goals. So when you look at that frontline supervisor role, consider a curriculum that would be needed specifically for them. What are the fundamental things? What are the foundational things that they need to have? How can they learn from lessons learned? How do they learn about continuous improvement? Taking a look at the leadership responsibilities. We'll talk a little bit more about let's talk a little bit more about the personal profiles at this point, how they deal with people. And I meant to talk about a little bit more with the senior management is there are tools out there to help people understand more about themselves and other people to make sure that they understand how they're working with people and how that impacts them. DISC, personalysis. I worked with a company where after you were there for 6 months, you had to go through what we call a 360 feedback exercise, which is amazing because you get to present what your perception of yourself is, and then other people, peers, workers, friends, get to give you their perception, and you'll be amazed at how often those don't line up. So this is really important when you're talking about having people in an organization understand themselves and how they work with people. How you lead individuals, and then leading teams. So that can be quite different at times. And then the situational part, making sure you understand what the focus is and what the priorities are on a day-to-day basis. So these are all classes and courses that have been developed for supervisors in the past when I've worked with other companies. And I've seen other companies develop these. And then the skill practice coaching, facilitation, performance counseling. That's a really hard thing for some people to do, especially if you've never been in that type of role before. Again, you've promoted this person as a technical expert into now a leadership and a supervisor role. And if they've never had to actually sit down and provide performance counseling for somebody, that can be a difficult conversation to have with somebody you've been working side by side with for the last 10 years, 20 years. These are things to consider as you're bringing people on board and how you want to do them at your company. What is the professional and career development path, not just for them, but for their people, because they have to walk their people through that. It will look different from organization to organization and company to company. And then this is where the training changes a little bit of focus. So a lot of what we talked about today, while there are some interactive components to it, there's not, most of it is just training, attending classes, reading procedures. We're going to go into now what the operators and technicians get, and I still find today that companies are not focused on this. They still want to focus on read and understand. So operators and technicians operate equipment. They basically need to come to you with certain labor skills. Some examples of this from the industries I've worked with through the years: I need to know how to print, inspect, and fill IV bags. Okay. You don't necessarily learn these things from just reading a procedure. You don't learn how to do them. You don't learn the nuances of actually doing this on a day-to-day basis. And I will say that if there's one message that I would hope that people would take away, and we've talked about this in previous webinars as well, is read and understand of SOPs, while it still today is used as a tool to say we train our people, it is not an effective way of training people, and it's not truly a training tool. It provides them the information, the task around what's involved with their job, but it doesn't provide them the tools they need to do their job. You do that through on-the-job training. Your operators, they have to be reliable, so they have to make sure that they're creating a quality output, quality products. They're showing up to work on time. They give supervisor input. Sometimes you have to give them stretch assignments. They have to be flexible, particularly in today's world of 24/7 operations. Sometimes they have to move around shifts. I know that I worked in the past for a place where you shifted shifts every 7 days. You went from days to mids or to evenings to night shift. And then understanding the impact on others. And they have the most expertise. They have the most expertise when it comes to operations. So you need a combination of on-the-job training and SOP reading in order to fully understand their job. Your operators and technicians, typically, they come from either a high school diploma or they come from a trade school or college. And I know that in say, the last 15 years, the way of the trade school has started to go away. So we have to focus more of that internally within our companies and within our businesses. How do we make sure that our people stay current or get the skills they need to do the job that we hired them to do? And they spend a lot of time getting experience through operations. So it's really important in this role, as people are actually operating equipment, doing it safely, creating a product, a quality product, that they do this in a proficient manner and they get enough practice at it before they're allowed to go do it on their own. So consider an on-the-job training program. And in that program, there's going to be soft skills. As you can see, every one of these topics starts, or every one of these areas starts with communication, teamwork, and then conflict resolution. Those are probably the three most important soft skills that I've seen at this particular level. This is entry-level work to basically your leads. From a technical side, they have to have these skills to perform the process, to take on the task. They need to know some computer skills. The project management piece, this role actually looks a lot like the supervisor role because it prepares them for that role. If you build the curriculum for them and do this all up front. These people will have the most time to attend this type of training and this type of education during the startup phase than they ever will again once the plant gets to operate. So operators and technicians can't learn by read and understand alone, especially in today's environment where people are writing SOPs that are 50 to 100 pages long. They need to know what their job is. Their proficiency begins with on-the-job training, not just follow somebody around, but actually a structured program that has the critical tasks associated with their job, somebody who has the subject matter expertise to teach them how to do it the right way and consistently for everybody, and it has enough time to practice at it before they're allowed to go do it on their own. All of this is part of a structured OJT program. So when you're considering that in that design phase, what does it look like to have proficient operators on the floor to meet your goals of production output, to make sure you're maintaining a quality product? Most importantly, that everybody is operating in a safe manner so nobody gets hurt. Consider that OJT program, because that's a hands-on component that you can't replace with a read and understand SOP. Even experienced operators and technicians need OJT. And I tell this story, and I've told this story before, about there was somebody I worked with years ago when I was back in the training world and I was conducting OJT. I was on night shift. We had a HVAC guy come in. He came in to learn how to do maintenance on our air handling units, the way that we did it at that particular company. And you can imagine the first words out of his mouth when he saw me, because he was a good 20 years older than I was. He said, "Man, I've been in this industry for 30 years and been doing it HVAC work for 30 years. What are you going to teach me?" And so, the answer was pretty simple. The answer was simple enough to say, well, I don't know that I can teach you anything, but I'm sure that you can teach me a thing or two that I can share with other people. And most importantly, you haven't been doing it for 30 years at this company. So we need to make sure that we do things the way that our company expects it to do things, that matches our process with our products so that we maintain quality output. The rest of the night went pretty smoothly after that one, but that is a common response over the years that I've seen given to people, especially experienced people that come in who've been in the industry for a long time and say, "Oh, I've been to trade school, I know all this." And then when it comes time to do it, they haven't had a lot of time practicing what they learned in trade school 30 years ago. So teach them how to do it your way. Don't assume that they come to it on their resume, knowing how to troubleshoot, knowing how a refrigerant cycle operates. Make sure that you evaluate them on how they're going to do it your way, and teach them to do it the way your company operates, because it can be unique. All right, so we're coming to the end here, and as I said, there's obviously we can't cover everything here. These are highlights of things to consider, and Alice spoke earlier about the importance of doing this as far up front as possible And even to the point where when you're doing your hiring and talent management plan in the design phase, consider what these people need to know when you bring them in, not just what they're going to have on the resume. There are things you're going to look for in the resume, but how do you verify what they have there is current, and how do you teach them to do it the way your company does it with your processes and your procedures? So consider thinking about your management and staff training in the design phase. Every role in the company needs some form of education and training. They don't just bring it with them. They bring a lot with them, but they don't bring what your company's specific needs are. Some roles, particularly the operator and technician role, require hands-on training. Now, I'm going to say that I consider hands-on training a little different from being interactive training, because all of those other trainings that we talk about with senior and middle management and even frontline supervisors, there's a lot of interactive training. But hands-on training is where you actually go out there and put your hands on things, you operate them, you take them apart until you get to a point where you can do them proficiently. So demonstration of proficiency is extremely important. You want to do it the right way, the same way every time, to make sure that you get what you expect at the other end. So that in my particular industry, pharma and biotech, that patients get what they expect when they open a bottle of medicine. They get a quality product. So at this point, I'm going to ask Alice if she has anything else she'd like to comment on here, and then I think we'll be turning this back over to Kennex for a little bit of a Q&A. Right? Alice, you have anything else you want to add?
No, I probably one comment. I think operational readiness, I think we often talk about it, is it a destination or a journey? And it's definitely both, okay? We talked about the path at the very beginning of the seminar. And I think in terms of talent, that path, the earlier we evaluate it and understand it and get ready for it, is important. So I think we're ready for questions if anybody has any.
Great, thanks, Alice, for that great presentation. We're going to take this time now for the rest of the webinar. I mean, I think we had some good takeaway tools here. If anybody has any questions, please now put them in the chat box right now, the questions tab, and we will get the answers to you.
Whilst we're waiting for questions, I'm going to just relate a case study from recently, whereby a company was changing technology, so moving from an API technology to a cell and gene therapy. So one of the things that they did very early on was to evaluate local universities and institutions that they could utilize for the purposes of hands-on training, because they didn't have a facility to train in, and they were using a CMO to do the manufacturing of the product at that point in time. So this was hugely beneficial, whereby they were able to develop an outline of a training curriculum early and utilize the institution, the institution is called NIBRT, to help them with the hands-on training, the aseptic training, in terms of bringing the operators on board. So it wasn't just theoretical classroom. So they got the chance to work with cells. They got the chance to experience using the equipment. Now, granted, it wasn't their product, but it meant that it was really, really useful. And then as time went on, their understanding was reinforced with the vendor, with their own site, with eventually getting some time in the CMO site at a suitable time. So the partnering at the very early phase is really important.
Okay, so we have a question here. What is the optimum duration of a new employee training, OJT training, and number of days or hours?
Well, that's a really good question, and that gets asked quite frequently. How do we quantify that?
Not sure if we've lost you, Jeff.
That's a good question that gets asked quite frequently. Sorry about that, guys. But it's typically not something that gets measured in hours, days, or even weeks. Your typical OJT program takes place over months, sometimes even years. When you look at an OJT program and you consider what's required, consider what are the core requirements. What's the basic things that someone needs to be able to do their job within a short period of time. And you can define that. I've seen that defined as, I want someone working in 2 weeks. Okay, well, what do they need to be able to be proficient at in 2 weeks? Probably not a whole lot, but there is something that they can do. And then what are those things that are considered kind of an intermediate level? So over the next 6 to 12 months, what do they need to learn? And then as they get into advanced level, up to 2 to 3 years, what things should they progress through there? You can build a curriculum based on that type of model. Look at the basics, what makes them productive right away. Look at the intermediate things, what do they need to know long-term doing their job, prioritizing that for them. And then advanced, how do you help them get to that next level in their career ladder, in their career plan? I hope that answers your question.
I'm just going to add one point to that. Some of it comes down to what I would call foundation principles from an on-the-job training, and then it comes down to the complexity of the overall task or cumulative tasks. What Jeff said is exactly correct from the perspective of building iteratively and qualifying someone to do a particular task, followed by the next task, followed by the next task. And that means you do it iteratively. You know, if we're, you know, you're probably looking, the person who asked the question is probably looking for some metrics, and it's really hard to do that, but I can give metrics from a recent fill finish facility, whereby to bring an operator that had aseptic experience in a biotech facility rather than fill finish, to the point of being able to go through I suppose the clean room and the training and working at the isolator and the RABs, was a period of 3 months. And that was by the time they did their personnel qualifications, which was really the pinnacle of all the training. So I'm not sure if that helps at all.
Great, thank you, Alice. I'm gonna leave. We have another question coming in here. Hi, I would like. What is the way to define the frequency of the qualification once the person has been concluded his initial qualification?
So can you say that again? You kind of cut out the beginning of the question, sorry.
What is the way to define the frequency of the qualification once the person has been concluded it is his initial qualification?
Oh, that's a really good question, because a lot of people don't do the follow-up. I would call it a proficiency check, is what I think you're describing. I can tell you through my 21 years in the Navy and submarines, every 2 years we had to requalify everything. Is that practical in the industry I work in now? No. But there are certain things that we would call critical tasks that are defined as either safety related or product safety related, that do require periodic checks to make sure people are still doing it the way the procedure describes it, still doing it the way they're trained, because people, like we said, are the variable. They learn bad habits, they learn shortcuts, sometimes just because of the time pressure that they're put under to deliver. They find different ways to do things that don't necessarily align with our procedures and the right way of doing things. So I prefer 12 to 24 months, 12 months on critical task. 24 months, again, that's probably because of my background, but at some point you should be cycling through on a regular basis, verifying that people are doing things the way that they were taught to do them, and documenting that, because that also goes a long way towards their performance management as well. Alice?
Alice, you're on mute. Sorry, Alice, if you can just unmute yourself. There we go.
I'm not sure why that happened. What I was going to say was it depends sometimes as well in terms of the mode of supervision, and in terms of I love when we have leadership and I suppose team leaders doing Gemba walks, and these can be a real ascertaining the compliance to procedures, and there may be continuous improvement on procedures that people will realise that others will then need to be retrained in. So I think there's a number of mechanisms to do this, both informally and formally. So I love the team huddles when it comes down to continuous improvement, and this can also be used for clarification on a training perspective, and then if an update is required from an SOP perspective or otherwise. So think of it both as informal and formal. I think the durations that Jeff mentioned are what would be the norm in the industry, and then with certain things like aseptic process simulations and things like that, obviously that's prescribed by regulations. So I would think to look at it in terms of the complexity of the task, and then also use your continuous process verification of your, in terms of trending as an indication if there is a potential human error aspect that you need to evaluate and factor that back into the training, I think is important.
Great, thank you, Alice. I'd like to pause just a few more. We have some extra time here. If anybody has any questions, place them in the chat. And if not, we can wrap up fairly, fairly soon. Jeff and Alice, do you have anything else to send out as a key takeaway of this webinar?
No, again, this is just a snapshot of things to consider. Certainly the programs for each of those different levels in the organization or roles in the organization would be much more detailed and probably encompass quite a bit more. I think it's really important what Alice said, and she'll probably say again here, is the further you do this in the design phase or up front, the bigger dividends it will pay downstream in allowing people to do their job the way that your company would like to see it done.
Exactly. Yeah. So, at the beginning when we talked for the design for operational readiness, at the very beginning we can talk about a very simple matrix of role that's required, and in terms of when we feel that role is necessary based on the knowledge we have at that particular time point. And this is not only necessary from the perspective of looking at your overall, like what I would call your level 1 schedule, it's really important as well in terms of understanding the overall both capital cost but actually operational cost for readiness, because this can come as quite some surprise, because oftentimes from a project perspective you will have the capital cost is up to the end of OQ, and the cost from the people perspective in terms of talent management and talent development and qualification may or may not sit in another budget. So I think with the very practical things of understanding how much your project is going to cost, it's really important. But then in terms of a sustaining operation or a facility that's bringing in, say, maybe a number of products from a tech transfer perspective, and you need to build in the staff qualification there, very many of the staff might already be in existing roles and might be repurposing to, or want to, from a professional development point of view, move to another role. And this is really great to be able to do within a company. So again, to plan at the beginning of the tech transfer phase, what is needed from a talent perspective, so you can allow for the backfilling of the people internally as they move into projects. So all of this comes down to, can start as a fairly simple matrix over time, then build it to in terms of what the skills are required, what the level of training is in terms of foundation, the soft skills and the technical skills, and then move it and iterate it throughout the life cycle. So I think doing that makes a tremendous difference, and make sure we are picking up on every learning opportunity and every knowledge exchange opportunity you can have throughout the life cycle of the project. So I've been in unfortunate positions in the past whereby the team involved in bringing a project to OQ or even sometimes PQ complete is a team of contractors or working for an engineering company. And then there's this hard block of a stop that you hand over to your operational staff. It's this hard handover is something that we want to really avoid, and make sure we understand and transfer the knowledge from a process perspective, from equipment perspective, the tacit and implicit knowledge that you learn as you go, and that the formal qualification that we need to achieve operational readiness, we were there at that particular milestone at the right time.
Great, thank you for that, Alice. Well, I think we're going to go wrap it up here. Thank you again, Jeff and Alice, for taking the time and providing a wonderful presentation. Reconnects would like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Please make sure to look out for an email after the webinar containing the slides as well as information to register for our next webinar. Any questions that we did not get to today, we can definitely forward to Jeff and Lisa and provide you with their contact information. And please keep an eye out for the follow-up email with these handouts and the presentation slides. Thank you again, Jeff and Alice, and I'd like to thank everyone here for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Thank you.